have been 6 majors in CSGO, all basically equivalent to a world championship, roughly three per year. And if you look down the players who have the best accomplishments in these majors, you're going to see a familiar list of great players, guys from Virtus Pro, NIP, now some of the Envious guys. You're going to see Fnatic people, even some of the TSM players, top 4s, top 8s. It's going to make sense, a lot of the great names that are up there, because these are the greatest players in history. But there are some names where you look down their performance in the majors and it almost borders on inexplicable how poor their actual results are compared to the stature of these names. So I want to go over 3 of the most egregious examples where these are people who, relative to their region or the time period that they're playing, are great players, but they just don't have the record at the majors to really back up how good they are. So the first name I'm going to start with is actually the one that overall has the best results of the 3 that I'm going to mention, which is Kenny S. Now the reason why, it'll sound crazy, okay, when you think of this. So he had never been in the top 4 of a major until this last major, despite being one of the best players in the history of CSGO. I mean, we're talking someone who has been legitimately a top 10 player almost the entire way through CSGO. Admittedly, the last 3 to 4 months, he'd had a drop-off and he had some issues, but from the first sort of 2 years or so of the game, just top 10 the whole time. And then, at certain points in time, much better than that. There was one point in time, end of 2014, early 2014, where he was the best player and played at what I actually think, in terms of just player peak, might be the highest player peak for any player in CSGO. Like, Olaf Meister's done it longer now, Get Right had a much longer span of time and was the best unanimous consensus for a long time. I think he's probably the best player ever, but in terms of just the peak and how high that level went and how consistently high it was, Kenny S's peak was absolutely incredible. And so for a player that great to until this point never even have made top 4 major was absolutely an oversight, and it just, how is it possible? And it was just confusing, and it was almost like a little painful to think that someone so great and so incredible in all other areas of the game had never had any success in what we now consider the most important sort of field of competition for top CSGO pros, especially compared to his peer group. He had fallen in the group stage 3 times out of the 5 occasions that he'd competed. He had been to the round of 8 only once, and the problem is that was the first time. So it's hard to even take it solace from that. So the first major he attended was the first major overall, Dreamhack Winter 2013. This was when he was kind of in exile. He was in the wilderness of the French teams because he wasn't even in one of the top 2 French teams. He was in the 3rd best French team, who at this event went under the name Recursive. And it was basically him as a solo carry. Like, they had like some okay other players, but not really. When you talk, not many of the names you'd know, put it that way. This was basically him solo carrying as an AWPer, and he was doing it at this tournament. In his group, he had NIP, 2nd best team in the world. He had iBuyPower, who the scrim hype about them was that they were wrecking everyone in the scrims, and everyone thought this is on paper the best NA lineup in terms of raw talent. They should be dangerous. And then they had Universal Soldiers, who are now Virtus Pro. It was that exact same lineup, and obviously now one of the greatest lineups of all time. So actually, in this group, his team shouldn't have made it out. They were the team that of the 4 should have been the least likely to make it out, but they were able to make it out. They were able to beat iBuyPower. They were able to beat Universal Soldiers. They got out. They got to the quarterfinals, and they played Fnatic there. Now, anyone who knows the history knows Fnatic go on to win this event, but actually, this team was one of the only teams in the event, along with NIP, to win a map off Fnatic. They managed to beat them. I think it was Dust 2 in like a close game, and Kenny did well in this series, did well in this tournament, and he had a standout tournament. Amazingly, with probably his worst team and his worst chance at any of the majors, that until this last major was his best performance at a major. Because then you go to next year, and now we go to Esl Cologne, and this team's only marginally better, because this is Clan Mystic, and again, he is still the 3rd best team, because the best team obviously is Titan, who were the best team in the world at the time, and the 2nd best team is LDLC of Happy, etc. So Clan Mystic, their group, was actually one where this was a pretty tough group on paper, actually, because they had Complexity in their group, and Complexity had obviously finished top 4 at the last major and had done okay at the ESEA. They had LGB, who was the team that had Olaf Meister, Crims, Dennis, etc. And at this tournament would actually go on to finish top 4. And we knew they were at least decently strong from their old lineup that made top 8 at a major, and then had good results, close games with NIP repeatedly. And this is a team where, and the last team was Na'Vi. and this is the team where they just brought in Guardian, from what I remember, and they did really badly at this tournament. Well, they'd actually been there from the end of last year, but this is the first big event we'd seen them at internationally. So they lost to Complexity. Okay, makes sense. They beat Na'Vi. They actually beat Na'Vi in a close game. This is the Na'Vi that like something like a month and a half later would actually wreck that Star Series tournament with the same lineup and win it, beating all the top teams. They beat Na'Vi, but then they lost to Complexity again. So reasonably looking at that, yeah, they're supposed to lose to Complexity in those two games. This is one where actually he shouldn't have gotten out of that. At this point, in theory, he should be 0 for 2 in majors in terms of making the playoffs. But actually, he's made it on the first one. He doesn't make it on the second one. But that actually makes sense in that particular case. The context figures out there. Next major, Esl Cologne 2014. Now, at this point, he's in Titan again, and Titan's had good results. They've had like solid performances against NIP in best of threes. They finished second at Gfinity G3 and had a shot to win that tournament. They're looking like a good team. They come into this tournament, and their group is Cloud9, Vox Eminor, and Dignitas. And Dignitas is now the team, the core known as TSM. Now, when you look at that lineup on paper, actually, Kenny S is supposed to, for the first time, make it out of groups now. Titan is supposed to get out of the groups here. They're a top 5 team in the world. They definitely should have been better than C9, and they should have had a good shot against Dignitas at least. They should have at least had a chance to win that match. And Vox should be an easy one. Obviously, instead, they lose a narrow overtime game to Cloud9. Okay, that's not a big problem. I mean, that you should have won that game, but okay, you still got a chance against Dignitas, right? No, because famously they get wrecked by Dignitas on Nuke, and that's them out of the tournament. So that one was quite shocking, actually. You would have expected them to make it out there. You'd have expected... I mean, Kenny had like a decent game in the Cloud9 game, but the Dignitas game... I mean, obviously Nuke's harder as an AWPer anyway. That's not a map where anything goes well for the whole team. It goes completely to shit, and so, yeah, that's them out of a major. On what really should have been his first time to make it out, he does make it out. Then you go, obviously he didn't play Dreamhack Winter because sadly the Kaylee incident had his team actually just removed from the event and weren't even offered a chance to qualify, which I think is fucking bullshit, but thanks Valve. ESL Katowice for this year, Titan comes in, and sadly this is the first event where Kenny drops off God mode and actually becomes just like bordering on not even a star at times. He's still putting up numbers, but the impact play isn't there anymore in his game. At this tournament, this group looked great. You had Envious. Okay, Envious is one of the best teams in the world, second best team overall, but Envious is a team where Titan have always matched up well with them and been able to steal wins off them and play them close. So you've got a chance even against the favourite here. Then you've got Penta. Now that's a dream. Penta finishing top 8 at the last major, Dreamhack Winter, meant that that was actually, along with the Keyed Stars, in theory, the best team you could get at this point in the group. And in fact, I'd have said they were the best team because the Keyed Stars guys, hey, actually Keyed Stars, come to think, it wasn't that major. Forget that anyway. So they were actually by far and away the easiest one to have made it out. They were the worst team in the round of 8 of the previous major. So you've locked out massively by getting them as your second best team here. In theory, on paper, this Titan should have been able to beat that Penta team. This is a Titan team that had top placings, that had all those sick best of 1 wins at the iOS Pantamera over all those top teams on the best maps that those top teams play on, and got into the final of that tournament. This is a team that should have been getting out of the group here, and the last team was LGB, the Norwegian LGB lineup. So no problem here, right? You should be able to potentially be able to beat Envy, probably not. Then you should take care of Penta. Penta come back later, play Penta again, or LGB, doesn't matter, beat them, you're out of the group. Instead, obviously, they play Envy really close, but they lose a heartbreaker on Cobblestone, they get wrecked by Penta, they're out of the tournament. They were literally straight out. Now this is one where they definitely should have been. The other one they should have made it out on the numbers against C9 and Dig, and C9 did play above and beyond, and Shroud was a lot better than we thought he was, but this should have been one where it was almost a lock to get out. Now admittedly Titan wasn't some super team, but just in terms of the context of the opponents they're playing. So now the last one, Esl Cologne. Now this is the one where it might, at this point, sound weird. Why is Kenny still on this list? Because of how many times he failed to make it for such a great player. Now this one almost makes up for that, except that bizarrely, his best run ever, finishing second at the last major, comes when he played, of all these events, not even his best out of all those tournaments. Like, he played some good maps. He wasn't close to the star for his team. He had good maps, he had decent maps, he had okay, and he obviously had a terrible map in the final, probably the worst map of his whole career, yet he finished the highest he ever had in a major on the Cobblestone game against Fnatic in the second map. Finished second, beat TSM in a best of 3, beat Na'Vi in a best of 3, wrecked the group stage. Admittedly, one was like a close game against, I think that was against Luminosity, right? So, That's Kenny S for you, one of the greatest players ever, but still, even with this second, that resume doesn't quite match up to where we expect it to be for how great a player he is. I mean, you talk about top 10 players of all time, he's going to be high on that list, and he doesn't have still the resume. So he's starting to make inroads on it now, but it's still confusing to some degree as to why he doesn't have a better record there, because a couple of these events, his team should have been moving on, they weren't, and he was a connecting factor between them. And I think in general, if you look back at it, bizarrely, when his team have been the favourites at the majors, he hasn't played that great, actually. When they were their underdogs, he played great. He got his team out at the first major, got him a win against Fnatic, round of 8 finish. Even at Katowice, they're beating Na'Vi. Hey, they've got chances, reasonably stacked group, don't make it out. But then the ones where they're favourites, they're the ones where he doesn't show up that much, where they don't perform very well and they don't get out the groups. So I think there is something to be said for that. I'm not sure why, though. Another name and another AWPer, Skadoodle. Now, in terms of NA players, one of the best NA players of all time, incredible player. Right now, a legit superstar level player in CSGO, one of the best players in the whole world. But at 5 majors he's played at, much like Kenny, he's only played 5, because in his case, when his players got banned, he was drifting and wasn't in a team for the Katowice this year. That was when he was teamless. So he's played in 5 majors, but in all 5 majors, he's failed to make it out of the group stage. So let's go major by major. First major, Dreamhack Winter 2013. iBuyPower have this insane hype that they're doing so well, and like, listen, they're going to be so dangerous, and skill-wise, they can go head-to-head with some of these NA teams. They're in a group with Kenny S's Recursive, NIP, super sick team, and Universal Soldiers, who now we know as Virtus Pro, but at the time hadn't had many big results, especially not with that lineup, and had changed away from the classic Golden 5 lineup. Not really the real one, but one of them. So in this group, they should have had a shot to get out. Recursive should have been a win for them. NIP, no, they should lose that one, but they should even have an outside chance at maybe some crazy upset, but probably not. NIP should be a loss. The Universal Soldiers game is where they should at least have a chance. They should skill-wise be able to go head-to-head with them. Stylistically, Universal Soldiers will play a loose kind of style. iBuyPower should have had chances here. Instead, it wasn't like that. It was quite embarrassing, actually. They went out, I think, even in last place. They got wrecked completely. They were out in the group stage. EMS Katowice, March 2014. iBuyPower's group is Dignitas, Fnatic, Reason Gaming. Now, don't look at that lineup and go, wait a minute, that's a really sick group, isn't it? No. First of all, Reason was one of the worst teams in the tournament. That was like a team that was like Carrigan, Freeze, SMF, EXR, like a bunch of people where you've heard of a couple of them. Obviously, Carrigan's now a lot better known, but at the time wasn't considered a good player or anything. He was actually quite bad at the time. And this lineup's like the 3rd best Danish lineup, and even then it's not very good at all in many senses. So it's real difficult to do this lineup. This should be an auto win with ease there. Dignitas, okay, are good, but this is actually where they would have the first big performance of their careers. They'd only made the round of 8 of the last major. They'd changed players. They'd gotten wrecked when they'd gone to the Fragbite Invitational in February, and the Dreamhack Invitational. So this should be a group where, and Fnatic was the team that had won the last major, but then dropped off a bit, and now at this point in time were vulnerable. They could be beaten here, as we saw in the round of 8 when LGB played them, and they weren't, and this was as they were going downhill, because they were a bit of a fluke team in terms of how effective their style was at the end of 2013. So actually, when you look at it on paper, this iBuyPower team, who'd won ESEA and beaten Titan in the final in 2 best-of-3s, should have been able to get out of this group. If not in first, let's go ahead and say either Dig or Fnatic gets it together. Probably should have been Dig in terms of how good Dig was at this era of time afterwards. Let's say Dig gets out in first. This team should have been able to get out in second. This was their chance to do so. This was a very reasonable group. They didn't do so. They got out of the group stage again. Esl Cologne for 2014. Their group was Fnatic, the new Fnatic lineup, remember. This is the second big event for them, and they would end up going to the final and be one and actually almost winning it. There was Dat Team, who was Flamey, and a bunch of those guys. And there was, who was the other one? Virtus Pro. Now, okay, admittedly, the new Fnatic lineup was very scary online. It already had a top 4 at Gfinity, but I think they should have been able to at least match up a little bit skill-wise at the time with them. That team should have been an easy win, far and away. People all thought Flamey cheated because how crazy his online results were. Virtus Pro, okay, admittedly, Virtus Pro's just won Gfinity. That's going to be a hard one. So, okay, this group isn't that easy. This is a reasonably hard group, but you're going to have, at least in theory, have chances against Fnatic. And VP themselves can be erratic sometimes on one map. Admittedly, they don't usually lose to lesser teams, but maybe there's an outside chance there. what are you able to do in this sense? Oh, and I think actually that VP lineup had already lost to, let me think, had they lost to them? I can't remember if they actually did play VP already. No, I don't think they did. So in theory, you have your chances there, but again, they don't make it out of this one. Now, Dreamhack Winter 2014 was where, after the great result of finishing second at Face It and then top 8 at ESWC, this team inexplicably kicked Days, kicked Steel, brought in Nitro, brought in Desi, and tried to go with this weird all-fragger lineup to the major. But again, there was this insane scrim hype that they were wrecking everyone in scrims, their boot camp's going insanely well, and they get the easiest fucking group you could ever imagine, because Kaylee getting banned opens up this ridiculous scenario where their group ends up being Copenhagen Wolves with like Cadian, etc., Dignitas. Actually, was that Copenhagen Wolves? That may have been the Dignitas Copenhagen Wolves. I might be misremembering that. I think I did. The Dignitas, which now is TSM, so okay, very reasonably strong team, but actually at the time had been dropping off a bit. We're probably more about like 56th level in terms of their overall results, and who, with their old lineup, they'd even been able to beat reasonably handedly, you know, on a key map at Face It, and then you get Penta, and this is the Penta where, yeah, it's a decent lineup. This is where they're going to have their big round of 8 finish. But in this group, this should have definitely happened. You should have been able to do this. You should lose to Dignitas. That happened. You should beat Penta. You should be out of the group. Should be no problem. Didn't happen. They blew it. It was a really close final game. They lost 13-16. They've blown it again, and they're out. Now, last one is this major. So this major, they played Mouse Sports first, who actually had been beating them. Had been a good matchup in terms of Mouse Sports side of it, even though Mouse Sports is a lower ranked team. They beat Mouse Sports, great. Then they played Virtus Pro. Virtus Pro is usually beating them. Virtus Pro does beat them. Okay, no problem. Let's get the redraw. The redraw puts them in theory, one of the easiest groups. Now, in the team they have to beat to get out of this group in the end is going to be Kingwin. Now, yes, Kingwin's a good team, but Kingwin aren't close to the level of a Cloud9 team and aren't considered anywhere close to an elite team when you consider some of the other teams you might have to play in some of these redraws. So, okay, reasonably hard in some senses, but you should be winning this. On paper, you should be able to win this. They don't. They blow it. It's a close game. It was very close, but they blow it. Now, in his particular case, the problem for Skadoodle is he was only really at a superstar sort of level, reasonably, once you get to... Like, he was approaching star level around Esl Cologne and then Dreamhack Winter 2014. He should have been able to do things there. But superstar status was only for this major. And so the idea that he was in superstar status now, in the best peak of his career, and he didn't do it at this major, that is worrying. That is a disturbing sign. That suggests some sort of choking issues. I mean, obviously some team-wide choking issues in terms of some of the iBuy power lineups. It's amazing that he never made it out of any of these. And he was one of the only connecting factors through all of these. Because obviously now he's in fucking Cloud9 with none of the iBuy power guys. Then the last name we're going to look at is Existence, legendary leader of Titan and Very Games, one of the greatest in-game leaders of all time in CSGO, if not the best of all time. Just in terms of overall resume, all the matches he's played, all the teams he played with, all the players he's had, took them to their peak and used them in the most efficient way, and made his teams tactically good on certain maps and match up against certain opponents again and again, routinely finding good matchups even against the best teams in the world. Yet this is a guy where his teams have played at 5 majors, and he's fallen in the group stage 4 times, which is absolutely unacceptable for someone as great as a player as he is in terms of an in-game leader. So his first big major was his best result. He made it to the semi-final of Dreamhack Winter 2013, and they beat what was then Copenhagen Wolves, but basically later became Dignitas and is now TSM in the round of 8. Beat them there narrowly 2-1, and well, not that narrowly, but 2-1 result in the best of 3. And then in the semi-final they played NiP in what was in theory going to be the match for the ages, because NiP had originally been beating Very Games all the time and were the number 1 team. Then Very Games had finally started beating NiP in about 3 best of 3s in a row, became the number 1 team in the world, won 3 out of the last 4 events. Coming to this tournament, whoever wins this semi-final should win the whole title, win the major. They play it. It's a great 3-map series, although admittedly the 3rd map is spoiled by sort of like I think it was a crash or a DDoS or something. I can't remember what it was. Some sort of pause that did kind of ruin the momentum of the game, and NiP just win handily at that point on Nuke. So he goes out semi-finals there. Okay, fair enough. Bad draw. He still got top 4 at the major. Would never again get out of the groups. EMS Katowice the next year. So okay, for the first, let me just put it this way. For the first major, they were basically a favourite to be the champions. They were the number 1 team in the world, and they finished top 4. So that's okay, but actually for the level of where you're ranked, you should have been in the final at least. EMS Katowice. Their group, they had Mouse Sports, Cadian's Mouse Sports, they had Virtus Pro, which is obviously the first big event we saw Virtus Pro go ham it, and they had Hellraisers, who were the former Astana Dragons players. Now, at this tournament, they were a favourite to win the title again. They were the #1 ranked team in the world and should at the very least have made semis, if not the final, if not win the title itself. That's how good they were at the time. They have Mouse Sports, no problem there. Virtus Pro. Now, Virtus Pro, at this point in time, this is the first tournament they go ham. So actually, looking at it on paper there, you should have a pretty good chance of beating Virtus Pro. Should at least be competitive, right? Wasn't as competitive as it should have been. Then Hellraisers, you should definitely be able to beat Hellraisers. The problem is Hellraisers were a sick single map upset team, which is what happened here. Hellraisers won, I think it was like a 16-14 game on like Inferno or something, which was super sick close. And this one was the heartbreaker for Titan guys, because you do feel like if they'd have got to the round of 8, they could have done a lot in bracket play with how good they were tactically, with how deep their map pool was, how well they matched up against opponents, how good the in-game leading was. This was the real heartbreaker. This was the one where they could have done a lot of damage and gone deep, but they didn't, and it didn't work out that way. Then you go to, and actually you even look at the group there, and after the fact you look at the group and you know that actually it's a lot more dangerous than it initially seemed beforehand. So okay, next major, ESL Cologne. Now this is where Titan comes in, and Titan is a favourite to make the semis here. They're a top 4, top 5 team in the world. They've had some good placings, had some great series play. They were second at Gfinity G3, and you think to yourself, right, they've got a good chance here. Their group is Cloud9, Fox, Dig. I went over this in the Kenny S1. They should be able to beat Cloud9. That should be a lock almost. Fox is easy. Then Dig, they should have a chance to, if not be a favourite to beat. But on certain maps, at least Dig has a chance there. Obviously, in the end, Nara lost to Cloud9. Vox is no issue. Dignitas, heartbreaking, smashed by Dignitas, no chance. That one really did smell of like choking, like interesting to play Dig on Nuke, considering, yeah, you're an extremely strong team on Nuke yourself, but what a risky play to go for in terms of the deciding map. I mean, obviously the heartbreaker is the Cloud9 game, but beyond that, you can't just talk away the Dignitas one as though nothing happened there, because you got totally wrecked on it, and not even against a great in-game leader in Fetish. Then you go to ESL Katowice for this year. Now, at this point, I'd have said reasonably, Titan was probably a favourite to make top 8. They should have made the playoffs and dropped out there. That would have been reasonable because, like I said, they had Envious who they could go close with. Penta should have been a win, and LGB should have been no question. And obviously, losing to Envious was fine, but then they got wrecked by Penta, so that's really disappointing, and you've performed way below expectations there. Then this ESL Cologne. Now, this ESL Cologne, interestingly, is the one time it's acceptable that Existence didn't get out of the group. This is the one time where it made sense that they shouldn't get out of the group, because in their group, first of all, they played Na'Vi and lost to them. Na'Vi's amazing. I had them ranked number 2 in the world at the time. Makes sense to lose to them. Here's where it's unacceptable, is even within the performance, they then lose to Renegades in the redraw, which it's not acceptable. That should have been a win for them. You'd expected the Titan team, even this new lineup, to be able to get that win. They weren't able to, and they should have at least been playing to get out of the group, but they shouldn't have made it out of the group. So overall, in totality, it's fine they didn't make it out that one time. So when you look at his history, okay, first major, should have done better than they did, but still top 4, okay, good. Second major, for the second time, number 1 ranked team in the world, don't even make it out of the group. That's unacceptable already there. Ranked number 1 for 2 majors, don't make it out. Favourite for top 4, you don't get out of the group. That's very disappointing. Favourite for at least a quarter-final result, that's not that bad, but it's still not very good that you lose the Pentarun at 1 and you don't get out. And then this last one, it's fine that they don't make it out, but disappointing even within that. So that we can see consistently there's disappointment on different scales here. I mean, you have to say, I've got to say this, I think he's an amazing guy, and if you look at the totality of his career, he's an incredible in-game leader. One of the strengths of Existence as an in-game leader, believe it or not, was being able to call in high-pressure, late-game situations where you need those last 2 or 3 rounds to grind it out, win the game, and that's what made them so good at matching up against people. In Majors, he's shown a very poor ability in that sense. His teams tended to either just full-on front run or just not really be able to grind in that particular sense. And we've seen routinely this is part of why they're getting blown out, they're getting wrecked, they're losing to lesser teams than them in the rankings, teams that even matchup-wise they should have a chance against. The map picks they're making normally would make sense. They're normally one of the best. He's normally one of the best at making the map veto. Some of them are almost inexplicable for giving strong maps to opposing teams where they're going to have a chance then to beat you. Hellraisers one stands out on one, because even though Titan were legendary Inferno team, Hellraisers is a team where they only had 2 maps they're even vaguely good on, which was like fucking Inferno and Dust 2, and maybe some Mirage. Like, this is a team where you could definitely get them off some of these maps if you really want to. So, yeah, Not good. Admittedly, it is worth throwing in as well. He did have some of the best players in the world, some of the best of all time, like Shox and Kenny S, in their best modes, inexplicably underperform, particularly at the two Katowice tournaments. Scream was always considered one of the most skilled players, routinely underperformed in a bunch of these big games, and even Apex obviously had his time in the sun, but never in Titan and never at the majors. Well, add those two things together, never in Titan at the majors. So yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why these three sort of names, when you're talking about great players, really stand out is because, okay, if I say Dosia, now Dosia is one of the greatest players of all time. For the first year and a half, he was a really big impact player, very strong fragger. This guy's been in the quarterfinals 3 times. So it's way better than Skadoodle. That's actually over the odds, better than Existence. Someone like Makalele's been in the round of 8 2 times with Kingwin and with the original LGB at Dreamhack Winter 2013. He's made it to 2nd place with NIP at Dreamhack Winter 2014. So these are guys where we don't think of them as great players as some of the other names, and yet they've got much better resumes. So you can see these names really do stick out in terms of how bizarre it is that they've never had those results, and how maybe it is telling to something about them, their personality, their makeup as people. Maybe they crack under a certain type of pressure, not just pressure in general, because they are great players who've made it very deep to finals and winning big tournaments, but in a certain type of a pressure or a certain type of moment where they're expected to do more or to go to a certain level and they've been unable to so far. So thanks to Overdraft for giving me that sweet cash and offering a service where you can play fantasy esports, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Dota 2, League of Legends. You can make teams, you make a roster out of like a $50,000 salary, you pick the players you think are going to frag well that day, you try and get the most points out of everyone and win whatever placing you get. It's a way to make cash. Thanks.